Okay, hello, welcome to this channel, which is going to be very low effort. So basically this is a channel where I'm going to go through and talk about some of the ideas that I think are interesting about how we could make the world a better place. I'm going to be redoing this video over and over again, I'm sure, over time to make it better and stuff. I'm just doing this straight off the cuff. No real preparation other than making these lovely slides that I printed out on pieces of paper. So yeah, that's going to be the gist of the channel, is just me going through some things that I think would make the world better. And I'm doing it because we live in rough times, and there's lots of different opinions, but they all seem to be roughly in the same things repeated over and over and over again. And I just wanted to say, put out some perhaps more novel and fresher ideas that might appeal to multiple different groups, or in fact may appeal to none. So we're going to find out. So the first thing I'm going to start with is, I call it usage rights. I'm not going to quote anything or reference people or do anything in this. It's just going to be like me putting out the idea as quickly as I can so that I actually publish it, and you can make comments and critique and reference things if you want in the comment section. But I'm going to call this usage rights. It's a terrible name, but it's basically what I think would be the most productive way for approaching the climate problems that we have at the moment. And the fundamental thing here is, of course, how do we reduce our CO2 usage in a way that's fair for everybody and is actually doable. Because right now people are coming up with ideas that don't seem to be really actually working, and we're on track to be kind of stuffed. But so we'll start with this. So this is going to be, we're going to call usage rights 1, because we're going to be leading into a more general version of this that extends outside of carbon dioxide production. But for this one, we're going to focus on that. So I'm going to say first off that you need a market solution. Like, we can't really have the state. I'm going to say I'm not going to be putting forward solutions that require the state to tell people what to do or to restrict things so much. But we're going to sort of focus on solutions that use the market mechanism to solve our problems. So I'm a big, I have a computer science background. I love the idea of emergent properties. So I want something that's simple, and out of that emerges the properties that we want. So I'm going to say this is the only realistic option, because no matter what other options you come up with, you're always going to have one side against the other side, and then they're never going to agree. You know what I mean? So there are some things. We've got a cost-based one where we can tax people. We can tax the carbon that's used. Now, I know this is this thing. I think Canada was trying to do something like this, or they are doing something like this. And then there's a supply. So in this case, with cost-based, you're not restricting, you're not saying this is a set amount of carbon that we're allowed to use. When I say carbon, I mean carbon dioxide. If you're going to be the kind of person who says, well, we're all made of carbon, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean. Let's not be silly. You can tax the carbon, and then you can use that to try and create the right amount of tax such that the amount of carbon that you want, that you get to the amount of carbon that you want. So if the society is producing too much carbon, you tax more, and if it's and so on till you get to that point. And a supply-based one is where you just say, this is how much carbon we're going to be allowed to use or produce. This is the amount of carbon pollution that we're going to have. And we're going to create a market around that. So this is a cap and trade thing, and I don't want to do the taxing thing. That doesn't really appeal to me. It feels like it's not going to work. It's just going to come across, people are going to be sitting there and saying, oh, this is just the government interfering. You're going to get whatever happens in Canada and all these places. It just doesn't go down well with a big chunk of the population. And has problems. It doesn't feel neat and tidy. Whereas we're going to go with this. So you're like, well, we already have cap and trade things, where you set the total amount of CO2 pollution that you're going to have, carbon pollution, and that's somehow sold to the people who are actually emitting or producing the pollution. I'm in New Zealand. I come from New Zealand. We do have some sort of emission trading scheme that most people do not understand, but I believe it works roughly that certain big, emitters, they get an allocation per year. If they can then sell that on to other people, other organizations, or on some of the carbon market. But they get given a particular allocation. Maybe if they don't use, if they need more, then they have to buy from other people. So that's the trading part of this. The problem is, well, it's abstract in a way for most everyday people. Like, I've never had any interaction with a carbon trading scheme in my entire life. It's something that apparently goes on in the background in New Zealand's economy, but nobody knows about this. The average person doesn't. It doesn't directly come to me, and it feels really weird because it feels like, well, why should, I have no control. It's not, I have no control over who gets these carbon credits in the first place, or why. It's all these sort of weird things, and I kind of want it to be more connected to the people of this, of a country, or the people of the world. So this is where this scheme comes in. Let's not do that. Let's focus on the individual, the citizen, the people of the world, right? So again, we have, a CO2 budget, but it's not divided amongst the emitters. It's not given to people who might possibly do that, and then they trade between themselves. But it's given to individual citizens, so everyday people. And this seems, the first thing you might say is like, well, this is going to sound very, very complicated, and, it's going to have a whole lot of extra stuff. And I'm going to be arguing, no, it doesn't. So the emitters, blah, 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 organizations, whoever, that are, emitting in the same way. Like, I'm going to come back to this. How do you work out who these people are? But these are the problems that you get under any sort of carbon trading or taxing scheme. So we'll come back to that at another point. Let's just say there are a bunch of people who emit carbon, and they will need to get credits to do this. They will need to get permission to do that emitting. So this would be, so before I'm jumping ahead on this thing, so I had to apologize. I wrote these slides a long time ago, and they may be all over the show. So I might not, have the best argument, which is why I'm saying this is going to be redone several times until I get the argument just right. But so this would be, we're going to say it's going to be normally managed by an independent central exchange. So this is where the first hint of how I'm trying to make this actually really simple for the individual and not something that they're going to have to worry about. Well, you're going to see what I mean as we go on to the next bits. So as the individual, as me, as a normal human being, I do basically nothing different, right? I will be allocated some CO2 or carbon credits to me each year. I will again discuss exactly how the allocation works at a later point. And these will be sold through, typically, I don't know how I put it, the exchange. It's like these will be typically sold through an exchange to emitters. Now I'm going to come back to this. You could choose to do this yourself or directly, but for the most part the idea of this is we all get an allocation, but it is automatically sold for us on an exchange to the people who are doing the emitting. Okay, and so the important thing from this is because I get these credits every year because I'm alive and I'm a citizen of a country, they will be sold automatically unless I say something different, which we'll come back to later. And from there, I will receive some money each year from the sale of my personal carbon emitting credits to whoever buys them. Okay, so that price will become from the market. It's not decided by the government. It's just what people are prepared to pay. And remember, when I'm going to come back to this, the emitters have no carbon emitting rights. Okay, if they want to emit any carbon at all, they have to buy it off the exchange. So they have to buy it from individuals. So that varies very different from, like, say, New Zealand's current emission trading scheme. So as I say, the process, unless otherwise decided, is automatic. So this will happen for everybody. We'll have the exchange is something that's separate from the government, but it's kind of like the central banks of countries. It's part of the state, but it's not often run or dictated by the government in power. At least that's how it works in, like, say, New Zealand. And this sort of exchange would work in a similar way to the central bank. It's separate. And I'm going to come back to the funding for this, but obviously you could fund this simply by having a surcharge on the transactions that happen. So when someone buys, $1,000 worth of credits, they're actually paying 1,010 or 1,000 whatever, and that money is going towards the funding for the actual exchange. So people are working at the exchange. It costs money to do this, but it's like any service. You pay for something, you're paying for the exchange. You pay for things when you buy things off the share market. We'll do that. So the emitters, I'm going to check how much time I've got. I have a camera, it only does 29 minutes, so these are going to be broken down into at most 29-minute videos. But here we go. As an emitter, the emitter generally is a corporation or an organization, whatever. Like they're not every Joe Blogs on the side of the street selling potatoes to people. Well, they might be. I mean, farmers might have to do this. But we'll just regard them as larger groups. And so the emitters, they buy things from an exchange. So how the exchange actually works, we'll come back to that. I think there's quite a few ways that this could work. It could just be like an auction thing. Every year they have to buy credits for the following year. And they could do that over a period of time, and then they can bid for it, and that's where the market price comes from. Or they could just put forward what they want, and they could be told everybody wants to buy this many credits, this is how much it's going to cost, or we can work that out. I think I do come back to exactly, because there's a lot of interesting things about how the exchange will work. So no emitter is gifted any allocation of carbon credits, as I said before. They are not the ones who get the credits, it's the individuals or citizens, the people of a society. So this will increase their operating costs. Now this is the most important thing, well, not the most important, but it's fundamental to this. It's going to cost emitters money, right? In say the emission trading scheme that New Zealand have, if you're an emitter that you use your allocation, you're not paying anything extra, right? Because you get given those credits to start with, and you're just working within your limits. In this case here, you are increasing your operating costs because you have to buy these credits, all right? But the important thing is the costs can be passed on to the consumers. And this is a good thing. I have to stress this because this whole thing hinges on this. This is what you want. You want the cost to be passed on to the consumers. And if you're jumping up and down saying, oh, what about all the poor people? This is just going to increase costs on the average everyday person. Let's just finish what I'm talking about first, and then you can see where we're going, all right? So apparently we're going to talk about the exchange for a bit. So this is the order of my slides, so we'll go to this. So this is the state institution. This is just what I said before. It's run independently from the government. So the government would have limited rights. So they appoint a board, the head of whoever the current head of the central bank, whatever they're called. I can't remember their name in New Zealand. But they can be elected every so often, and maybe the government has the right to chuck them out if there's enough votes, or the parliament has enough rights. But in general, they're not the ones dictating, and they don't change with the election and this kind of thing. So they could, for example, use a bidding system to work out the market. The other options I think I've come up with before is you could, I have a degree in economics. You could do this lovely thing where they just give their actual demand functions, the demand curves. Everybody does that, and then the exchange, nice and legitimate, fairly works out what the optimal price would be given all this. So you have this sort of actual market optimum. You could set out the price and then just lower it until all of the credits are sold. So you could start off, say, it's $100 per credit. I'm just making these numbers up. You might get three organizations who desperately want to buy credits, and they know that $100 is worth it to them, and then you keep going down and down and down and lowering the price until you run out of credits. And then you could divide that up fairly, so whatever the total cost, and then you could spread it out to the individuals of your country. So I'm going to have to come back, and we'll have to talk about these in future videos and have discussions, because my experience of this is that people don't quite get it at first. So we'll just leave it there for now, and we'll go on to the next page. So the credit is the right to emit an amount of CO2 in 1 year. So it's an arbitrary unit. Like, maybe one credit means 1 ton of carbon dioxide. Maybe it means what it just, you just have to say, you could just say a ton of, you could just go by tons of CO2. So if your population has, 1,000 individuals and you have, why did I choose these numbers? I don't know. I should have gone, perhaps it was slightly the other way around. But say you have 1,000 individuals in your country. It's a very small country. You're going to say we're going to emit 10 tons of CO2 this year. This is what we'll say next year. So I think there has to be, going to come back to it, there has to be a sort of offset in order to get the market to work. Let's just going to say that for the time period of interest, we're going to emit 10 tons maximum. So each individual gets 10 tons or 0.01 tons of CO2. So you could just say that's what they're selling. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You could just, people like the idea of having, I think people would like the idea of saying, well, I get given 1 million credits. Or I get given 10,000 credits. So 10,000 credits in this case, or 8,000 credits would buy 0.01 tons of CO2. But in the end, nothing matters. It's just what makes the public happy, I think. So you could just say, well, you get 0.01 tons. That's your allocation for the year, and people buy that. Or you could say you get 1,000 credits, and that just happens to translate to 0.01 tons. Whatever makes people feel that they get the scheme is what I'm trying to get to there. And how are we going for this? We've got 12 more minutes. All right. So, second base, an alternative approach. We couldn't have it fixed as a total, but fixed per individual. So, jumping around here, but the point is that, well, populations increase and decrease in numbers per year. I think in a lot of advanced, developed countries at the moment, they're decreasing or they're potentially going to decrease. So you could do it a different way. Instead of saying the total, you could say everybody gets 0.01 tons of carbon. I know that 0.01 tons of carbon is a very small amount. So let's just switch. They get 1 ton of carbon dioxide emitting per year. And if there's more people in the population, then then the total number that we're allowed to emit goes up or it goes down. So all individuals get 1,000. I don't quite know what I've actually tried to say there. So yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. So there are more people in the next year, so there's more credits per year. That's just another way of looking at it. Personally, I think this is not what you should do. You want to reduce every year the total amount, not the amount per capita. Sorry, I mean, it might be fairer this way, but we are in a climate crisis, and you're going to have to be a bit harsher. I will, in a future video, talk about the consequences of what you do when you do these things, because I haven't talked about, well, does everybody get the same amount, or do children get more, or do children get less? Do people with disabilities get more or less? So there's a whole bunch of arguments and discussion about that, but that's for a future video. For now, we'll just assume everybody gets exactly the same every year. They get the same amount. So they don't get allocated over their lifetime, but they do get allocated for a year. But the problem, I think, that will come out practically is that I can't get credits for the year that I'm currently living, because then organizations wouldn't have had a chance to purchase those credits for the year that they're functioning in. So you get an allocation in a particular year will be for a year in advance, or maybe a couple of years in advance. So you might get credits for 2032 in 2030. So then the exchange, the people who need to buy credits for 2032 have, between 2030 and 2031 in order to buy those credits for that period. So you might not get all the money for your allocation in 1 year, but don't forget, of course, that people who are needing to use credits in 2031 will have been buying them from 2029 and so on. So yeah, so I don't know why I put this, possibly unused credits. Who knows? We'll come back to this later on. So the credits do, or we could have the other option, is that credits do not apply. So I think what I was trying to say here, there is the thing is that if someone doesn't use their credits in the allocated time. Say they have credits. So I think what I'm saying here is, so that was one idea, is you buy credits for the year 2032 or whatever, and if you're a emitter, you have to use those by 2030 or in 2032, and if you don't use them, they're lost forever, and that's it. That's a nice sort of conservative thing, because it's sort of biasing you towards using less than your allocation. We want to get this down as fast as possible, and if some organization fails to use up their carbon, that's good. But instead of doing it by year, you could just say every year I get this many credits, and organizations have to buy these, but they're not for any set year. So I could, I need to buy credits for next year. I could just buy whatever is currently available. I could buy some more next year. If I was an emitter and I bought a pile this year and I don't use them, I could use them in 5 years' time. So as an individual, I get credits. They have no year limit, no nothing. They just happen to be given to me this year because I happen to be alive in that year, and then I can sell them as I want over time. This gives you the same amount of total emitting over time, but it does mean that in a particular year, maybe you actually use less than you emit less, and maybe the following year you emit more than the average you want, but the average is going to be the same. Again, if you don't get this, we'll come back to this in a later video. So that's that. So apparently I'm going to talk about this. So we allocate. How do you allocate this? So you could allocate equally to all individuals for every year that you're alive. So every year that you are alive, you get given a certain number of credits. But there is room for alternatives. I am going to come back to this. I'm going to quickly go over this. So maybe children get less, or maybe they get more. Like a small child maybe doesn't need as much carbon in order to sustain them, but a baby might need more than what their size dictates, right? Because children are very high needs at some points in their lives, and then they're less needs than adults. Personally, I find this a bit problematic. Maybe babies do, but the problem is that some adults are quite small and some children are quite big, and are we going to get down to allocating their carbon based on what their size is and things like this? It could get very complicated. I'm not too sure if it's really needed, but if you're pregnant, then maybe you also need a bit more, and so you can but these are things that you can discuss and talk about. People with disabilities may also require more, and to me that seems fair. If for whatever reason your disability requires things that pollute or require more pollution or more carbon dioxide, it's fair to actually give that person more, because it's not their fault that they have the disability. It's not otherwise you're putting a cost on somebody that they don't really deserve. So again, these are not. I'm not making a decision on any of these things. I'm just saying these are things that you can think about. I think I will come back and talk to things about. Maybe I'll probably do it in this video. Talk about people who have been incarcerated in prison and things like this. Do they get the same amount? What do you do with their allocation, and so on and so on? What do you do when someone's not in the country? We can come back to those later on. So again, the amount allocated per year doesn't have to be constant. In fact, it shouldn't be, because we are aiming to reduce our carbon usage over time. So polluting shouldn't be seen as something that we should all be doing. We should be trying to avoid it, but we're making a statement that it's not practical to just blanket, throw out everything and just go carbon zero straight away, carbon neutral straight away. I'd say when I just say carbon neutral, there is, I don't know if I talk about it here, but there is obviously the option that if you're doing something that is reducing the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that could earn you credits even if you're not an individual. That could also then be sold on the market. But I think that would have to go hand in hand with a steady decrease in what is allocated to an individual. Because we want to be shifting. This is the sort of making the market shift our society towards a greener society. So this would be monitored by the government. You kind of want to sit there and say, well, if we have this year successfully reduced our amount of carbon, If we're in the thing, then we'll slowly reduce it down the next year. But if we're not, if we're failing for whatever reason, then we obviously can't just push it down, because then it will start causing many problems for people. But hopefully you will be able to slowly decrease it over time. We've got a ton of these. I didn't realize I had so many. Maybe I printed it. I don't have so many. This is just a thing. So that's the first part. I'm going to finish the video here and do a part 2 of part 1 of my many videos, I hope. I'll come back and we'll talk about this in the next video. So this will be what will happen. So this is the important parts, which is why I'm going to do a separate video, is what is the effect on the consumer, or what is the effect on the individual. So thanks for watching so far, and join me for the next part of the video when we finish this off. Thanks. Goodbye.